said I wasn't going to talk anymore about relationships, but I seem to not be able to help myself. Because I decided to speak tonight about taking refuge in sangha, taking refuge in community. And ultimately, I guess it's taking refuge in these human relationships, this human experience. Every day when I meditate, I begin my meditation practice by taking refuge. And I'll talk for a minute about taking refuge in general. There are 3 refuges. And then talk more specifically about taking refuge in sangha or community and how it relates to the other 2 refuges. This is what I say when I begin my meditation practice. In the Buddha, the Dharma, which is the teachings, and the Sangha, which is the community, most excellent, I take refuge until enlightenment is reached. By the merit of generosity and other good deeds, may I and all sentient beings reach full, complete enlightenment. So our practice in so many ways offers us refuge. As I often like to do, I looked up in the dictionary the meaning of the word refuge. It means something like a sanctuary or a safety, a safe place. It doesn't take too much thinking to realize that this must mean something different than what we ordinarily think of as safety, because in this human life, with its aging and its inevitable sickness and certainly inevitable death, there is no safety in that sense. That we can't find a place that we can be secure and permanent and ultimately safe in the way that our kind of human brains tend to think of safety. So the Buddha is offering us a really profound kind of safety that we are invited to think of a little bit differently. When we realize that there isn't the kind of safety that we wish for, we can kind of misunderstand and really go about things in a not so wholesome or not so skillful way. We can try to find some sort of safety. We can, kind of blindly try to acquire possessions or money or power or fame or friendship or whatever. Enough peanut butter to survive the cyber collapse, whatever it is. My shelf has a grand total of 2 gallons of water and 1 jar of peanut butter. Every once in a while I feel inspired, but obviously not so much. I hope it doesn't last long. But, we can try to find something that will insulate us somehow, and that we can kind of really try really hard to get safety in that way. Or we can just sort of despair. We say, oh, it's just hopeless. Life is really just too hard. It's too difficult. Give up. Or we can get angry. We can kind of push against the difficulties of life if we don't really understand where safety really is or where refuge really is. The Buddha actually had the same dilemma. When he really saw that there is no safety in the ordinary sense in life, when he the famous story when he went out in his chariot, when he really got it about this inevitable failure, if you will, of this human life. And he set about trying to understand how then can we find balance? How then can we find freedom? How then can we find some sense of refuge in this human life? And as you hear him say a lot, and you hear me say a lot, I teach one thing. He says, I teach one thing and one thing only, suffering. Which is to say, there is no safety in the way that we ordinarily think of it. I teach suffering. I teach you how to understand that. And I teach the end of suffering. The end of suffering. I teach a refuge. I teach suffering, and I teach the end of suffering. And, I say that so many times in my talks. It's like, wow. That he offers the end of suffering. Wow. Pretty amazing. So these three refuges are three truths, basic truths, that when fully understood and practiced, bring us, lead us, plop us, open us to the end of suffering. So they're obviously not things where you'll just sort of write them down and take notes and then go home and everything will be just fine. Really, they're truths, they're refuges to really dig into and understand and live. Bring them into our lived experience. So it's not just a matter of knowing some concept, but really developing the capacity to really live into them in a way that really does lead to wholesomeness and ultimate freedom. So the first refuge is refuge in, well, actually it's the second refuge, I'm going to say it first, is the refuge in the Dharma. And Dharma is a Pali word, and what it means is the truth of how things are. And it isn't really the truth of how the Buddha says things are, but the truth of how just how life actually works. And one of the ways that life actually works is the truth of suffering. The truth that no matter what we do, no matter how many vitamins we take, it's all going to end in failure. That we're all going to die at some point. So the truth of how things work and the truth of how suffering works. That suffering isn't caused by that, by pain, by difficulty, but it's caused by how we relate to pain and difficulty. And for that matter, how we relate to joy and delight. That suffering isn't caused by what's external, but it's in our minds. And understanding that about refuge and Dharma really helps us understand a bit about, well, why do we meditate anyway? Why do we do this sort of kind of odd thing? One of my relatives asked me one time if I was still doing that oddball thing. I was sort of insulted, but I get her point. It really is sort of odd. You just come and you sit and you watch your breath. Why on earth would we do that? Why on earth would we do that? Because we're training our minds. We're training ourselves to actually release the conditioned aspects of our minds, to release our slavery to all of our conditioning, and to rest directly in the present moment, this present moment's experience. So it isn't about sitting quietly or being saying Om or having anything in particular, other than really cultivating this capacity to bring our minds really right here. To bring our awareness, to rest our awareness right here. So much of our teaching and much of our practice really focuses on what is actually a fairly simple but also somewhat narrow part, or small part really, of the Buddha's teachings on Dharma, because he also is saying, well, why would we do that? Why does that help? In so many of our teachings, as we talk here on Tuesday nights and as we teach in the retreats that we offer, really have to do with one or another aspect of why we would do that. Why and how coming into the present moment enables us to let go of the things that keep us imprisoned. Release all the ideas that we have that keep us not free. This is what the Buddha has to say about refuge. He says, driven only by fear, do men go for refuge to many places, to hills, woods, groves, trees, and shrines. Such indeed is no safe refuge. Such is not the refuge supreme. Not by resorting to such a refuge is one released from all suffering. He who has gone for refuge to the Buddha, the teaching, the Dharma, and his order, sangha or community, penetrates with transcendental wisdom the Four Noble Truths: suffering, the cause of suffering, the cessation of suffering, and the Noble Eightfold Path leading to the cessation, to the ending of suffering. This, indeed, is the safe refuge. This is the refuge supreme. Having gone to such a refuge, one is released from all suffering. Again. Wow. So the first refuge is refuge in the teachings about how do things work, the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, the factors of awakening, just all of the different pieces that we, in different ways, talk about on Tuesday nights. Much of what we teach is really refuge in the Dharma. The first refuge, that was the second one, the first refuge is refuge in the Buddha. And that's interpreted both as a refuge in the historical Buddha, really plural, but we tend to think of one Buddha. The fact that there is this real, just ordinary human being who was extraordinary in that he really pursued an understanding in a way that led to full freedom from suffering, which is to say, it's possible. And he says to us, he says, if I didn't know you could do this, I wouldn't have bothered to teach you. It's possible. So refuge in Buddha challenges that place in our minds where we think, well, I'll meditate a little bit, but I'm not really very good at it, and it's probably not going to help much. So it really challenges that place to say, take refuge. You can do this. And the other quality or the other meaning of refuge in the Buddha is really taking refuge in our own enlightened light, if you will. which all of us touch into at times. Sometimes they're very fleeting moments. But we touch that, and we touch into our own capacity, having faith, generating faith out of those moments of experience. One of the songs I love, one of the lines is, "May the long-time sun shine upon you, all love surround you, and the pure light within you guide your way home." And so refuge in the Buddha is really taking refuge in that pure light. You know those moments where we know, I was going to say kind of know, but we know with a lot of clarity what is wholesome and right and true, where we're not confused, where we're not caught in some tangle of suffering. We all know those moments. So taking refuge in the Buddha is really remembering the pure light within us, within each of us, within one another. And allowing that pure light to guide our way home in maybe mundane ways. It might be a very mundane thing, like, choosing wholesome speech or wholesome action. It might be less mundane, in a more profound, spacious experience. But taking refuge in the Buddha, really having that kind of faith. But primarily, I wanted to talk about refuge in sangha, or community. Safety, if you will. Finding safety, finding refuge. Originally it meant the community of monastics, and it was a teaching for lay people to take refuge in this community of wise people who really were practicing and investigating the Dharma and were able to teach it. So to go for refuge, if you will, in this community of wise people. One teacher puts it this way: a community of fellow travelers. A way of thinking about sangha in more modern times. Oren Sofer calls it a community of fellow travelers, explorers with a shared intention towards truth, love, wisdom. A community with a shared intention towards truth, love, wisdom, and a sense of community around this. There's a certain strength and energy of practice together. No one of us has to understand or teach alone. We can draw on one another as a source of strength and wisdom. We don't have to do this alone. We don't have to invent it alone. We don't have to figure things out alone. We don't even have to practice alone. Refuge in sangha. I wanted to touch on a couple of aspects of that. One is some of what we've been talking about in some of the earlier talks on relationship, is letting our community relationships reveal to us where and how we're caught in suffering. Those places where in relationship we think, the Buddha was wrong about this release of suffering. This is suffering, and it's just how it is, and there's no way around it. Those places where we can begin to investigate, where's the freedom in this? Where we see ourselves kind of caught in some way. And we can use it as a mirror. It has a little sign on it, or a doorway that has a little sign on it, like Alice in Wonderland, those little jars that had little signs that said, "Drink me." In this case, it's a little sign that says, "Look here." These tangles, these difficulties, look right here. What are you holding on to? What are you believing about yourself or someone else? What are you insisting about reality that can't be? What are you demanding of life that it isn't like that? Look here. What's the cause? What's happening that you're suffering? Look here. Which actually can bring us to the second meaning that I wanted to touch on, which is the sense of the community of, how did Oren put it? Community of people with a shared intention towards truth, love, wisdom, a strength and energy of practice together. That place where other people, other beings, can really help us grow in love and wisdom. Help us have energy, can support us in our practice, and can support us when things are difficult or confusing. Say, well, what if you looked at it this way? So refuge in sangha is really taking refuge in a community of people who have a kind of a shared vision and a shared intention and a shared inquiry. And each of us is in a slightly different place at any given moment. So when I'm really struggling, you have wisdom and you can say, but Sharon, and it works the other way around. That we can kind of share our experiences and inquire together into what is wholesome. And each of us here is here with a shared intention. It might not be sort of technically exactly the same. For some of us, it might be just some curiosity. For others, who knows? But the shared intention is an intention for the wholesome. You didn't come here thinking we were going to watch the Texas Chainsaw Massacre on a movie screen, that there's a shared intention towards something that is wholesome. And so we could kind of look around and just see our sangha here tonight, our community, these people, that person you introduced yourself to during the break. Oh. Sangha, community, here we are. And each of us has a huge community of people, beings who have guided us and helped us in growing toward wisdom and love and compassion in our lives. I was thinking about it, and I kind of just got overwhelmed thinking about all of the beings, who have taught me and guided me and supported me and helped me, taught, in just so many, many different ways. So I wanted to just take a brief moment and with this community here, do a little actual speaking to one another. And what I invite you to do is to contemplate for a moment some person in your life who is part of your sangha. It might be someone right now, present in your life, who's a source of inspiration, who guides you, who gives you some guidance in wise ways. It might be someone who inspired you years ago. One of my children had a math teacher in 10th grade who totally inspired her and completely changed her life. And for all of us, that community, that sangha, really, it doesn't take much effort, does it, to find those people, whether they're present now. And it could even be someone who sort of inspires you out in the world. I mentioned in one of my talks seeing the movie Invictus about Nelson Mandela. I just was so inspired by how he has lived his life. So I'm going to ask you to turn to someone near you, someone you may not know. So if you came with someone, turn to someone else you don't know so well. Introduce yourself, and just tell them who that person is and how they were part of your community. What did they do? What did they teach you? How did they give your life more wisdom, love, wholesomeness? So just a couple minutes, just share a little story with somebody near you. I'll ring the bell. So, that is, of course, not anywhere near enough time. But let yourself just touch the goodness. I mean, isn't that fun? To really remember and know this connection with, I mean, think of all the people who are now here in this room. And the connection of the goodness of all of that. That's refuge in sangha. A very different kind of refuge. I want to read a couple of quotes from Ajahn Amaro, and then ask Jeff to say a couple words. And he's talking about refuge in sangha. He says, the entire holy life is friendship, association with the lovely. Now, the Pali word for friendship with the lovely is kalyana mitta. Kalyana means lovely or beautiful, and mitta means friend. So it is often translated as association or affiliation with the lovely. Our like-minded companions and associates in spiritual life support our effort. And it is actually our ability to awaken to that which is truly lovely, to the wonderful, to ultimate reality, which is to say to the Dharma, that is in its own way the very fire of our spiritual life. If we try to establish a spiritual friendship without any real understanding of spiritual beauty or truth, then it will always end up being dysfunctional and codependent. But if we try to live with an awareness of or an intimacy with truth, with the Dharma, without any spiritual companions or support, we very easily lose our way. Neither approach will bring good results. The two support each other, and it is just this symbiosis that ideally the fourfold community of Buddhist disciples symbolizes and embodies. Laymen, laywomen, nuns, and monks, as spiritual community, can empower the opportunity for insight into truth, that place where we really do have a path for the liberation of all beings, from ourselves and all beings. Now, I wanted to ask Jeff, there you are, to just take a couple words, Jeff, about, we have not only this gathering here as Kalyana Mitta, as spiritual friends, but we have
what are known as KM groups, Kalyana Mitta groups. About 8 of them actively now within this sangha. Groups of 8 to 10 folks that get together usually every other week, every 2 weeks, usually in the home of one of the members. And practice together, we meditate together, we have what's called a check-in to see where everybody's practice is going and how it's going. And then may have some of the groups study texts, some study current books about meditation and practice, and some just talk about what's going on in their lives. Each group has its own personality. And so I would invite you to think about this as a way of really deepening your sense of community within this community and really deepening your practice. It's a very powerful experience for both. My group's been meeting about 10 years. We've had some turnover, but we really, it's a very, very intimate experience of sharing this path. And it's a wonderful way to, as I say, deepen your practice and deepen your sense of community. So if you are interested, you can go to our website. There's a link that will talk a little bit more about KM groups. There's a brief questionnaire if you're interested that you can fill out, and when you hit send, it will send me an email with that questionnaire. I'm going to be transitioning out of this coordinator job, but for the time being, you can still come to me, and then I'll get back in touch. We usually either have a waiting list until we get enough folks to start a new group, or if we have openings in existing groups, we'll try to sometimes plug folks into existing groups. But it is a powerful form of practice, and it's an important part of what we do here. So, thank you.
Thank you. Every one of the teachers is in a Kalyana Mitta group, at least one Kalyana Mitta group. It's a really powerful and important part of our practice. So we have our refuge in sangha here. We have our refuge in all sorts of ways, in ordinary ways, the ordinary ways that you spoke of with your friend, and we have these opportunities. This is Ajahn Amaro again. Through getting to know those who delight in the Buddhist teachings, we create a connection with them. We establish a support system. This is Kalyana Mitta, friendship with the beautiful, the network of spiritual friendship. This is what really enables us as a human society to hold together. Political agreements don't work. Laws don't work. It is our ability to strengthen and affirm our qualities of inner beauty, of kindness, of light, of generosity, and to encourage those qualities in others. That's what enables human beings to live in a wholesome and profitable way. So, a few words on refuge in sangha, refuge in community. I'm going to close with one of the ways that I often close my meditation. May all sentient beings, boundless as the sky, have happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be liberated from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they never be separated from the happiness which is free from sorrow, free from sorrow. May they rest in equanimity, free from attachment, confusion, and aversion. So may that be so for all of us as we go our way, really buoyed by this contact with community and by remembering the beauty and loveliness of these communities of people who share our aspirations for wholesomeness. So